Lit. The revolution is lit.
Uhuru, comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday study featuring Chairman Omali Shatella. My name is Akilia Nai, the Director of Agitation and Propaganda for the African People's Socialist Party, as well as your MC for this morning. Today's study is highly important, and we encourage you right now to invite your friends and family to it. This week, the Chairman continues reading from Vanguard Up, Unity of Theory and Practice, the political report to the first Seventh Congress Plenary of the African People's Socialist Party, starting on page 63 in the section Africa for Africans at Home and Abroad. For the first hour, Chairman will review the study materials, and in the second hour, we will open it up to you, our live viewers, for your questions. It's my honor now to introduce our leadership, the leader of the African nation and the worldwide African Revolution, Chairman Omali Shatella. Uhuru, Chairman.
Uhuru, Comrade Director, thank you so much for introducing me and the study for today. And I want to repeat what you've said and about how this study really is of a political report that was done in preparation for the first plenary of our Seventh Congress. And to just state that these plenaries that we do occur most often annually within the 5-year period between our Congresses. And so I will say something about that briefly. I want to say that even as we continue to talk about do this study, it's because our work is ongoing, and that this is not some static thing that we're talking about. It's not some dead process or just a matter of putting forth notions with no relevance in terms of practice. This is what we're talking about: unity of theory and practice, and so there's an ongoing process. Practice is ongoing. Even as we do these studies, it is to inform our practice. It is for us to stay on top of the work that we are involved in doing and changing this world and taking power for our people. So right now we are preparing for the second plenary of our Seventh Congress, and that will be happening between February 6th and 9th. So it won't be long before we will start this process again, just in terms of looking at the political report for that second Congress, plenary. I can already say that we will discover that much of what we put forward for the first plenary coming out of the Seventh Congress. We are still in the process of making it happen. That's why we're having this discussion today. Let me right now say to Comrade Nasir Al-Amin, I received your message and responded to it. We needed some more information from you to carry out your request as it was called for. But what we did do is we dropped the study materials into a link in the comment section, so you should be able to access that. Also, I do want to just say that we with you, Comrade Pharaoh, in the difficult circumstances that you find yourself in right now and have been for a while and participating in these studies, but we are aware of you. Just wanted you to know that. So we're going to begin, as Comrade Kile just mentioned, on page 63, under the subhead, Africa for Africans at Home and Abroad. And we are African internationalists. So the question of Africa is not something that's a kind of a casual pastime for us. It's critical, central to everything that we understand about our freedom, our liberation. And because the truth is that no matter where we are located, our circumstances everywhere are a consequence of the attack that Europe made on Africa. Certainly that is true at this moment, and that Europe made on Africa some 600 years or so ago, that resulted in the development of this particular social system, that capitalist, colonial capitalist social system that we're confronted with. So Africa is a critical question for us. And I mean, the most heroic efforts and most meaningful struggles, movements that we are familiar with subsequent to the attack on Africa by Europe, they have been struggles which recognize the centrality of Africa for us all. And of course, the outstanding movement was led by Marcus Garvey, who put forth the slogan, Demand Africa for Africans at Home and Abroad. And that was an expression of the reality that we were confronted with as homeless people. Everywhere we are homeless. To say that Africa is for Africans at home, which means in Africa, is a statement of our dispossession as well. At home, we were dispossessed, and then obviously taken away from Africa, dispersed all around the world. We speak to that homelessness, to that dispossession. And so, Garvey's movement, Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League was the most ambitious, boldest effort in our history. It was a part of an anti-imperialist struggle that was being waged around the world, where peoples around the world were trying to rectify this relationship that they had with this imperial white power that had been established at our expense and that had taken all our resources. So revolutionary movements, struggles have been occurring by peoples around the world since this intervention. And at the moment when, a time of Garvey, of course, there were other expressions of this revolutionary activity, this anti-imperialist activity. And the struggle led by African people under the leadership of Marcus Garvey was central to much of that. And one of the reasons it was central to it, of course, one of the reasons is because of it was headquartered in the United States, which has been for a while now the center of the oppression of the peoples of the world. In fact, the United States has been the strategic enemy of the peoples of the world for a very long time now. And even though it's staggering, trying to hold on to its throne, the reality is that even while it does that, it continues to be a very dangerous and to have a lock on the lives of Africans and other peoples around the world. And then subsequent to that, of course, one thing that emerged that was highly influenced by Garvey was Kwame Nkrumah and his efforts. And what gave his efforts a really important place in our history and our struggle was the fact that he became the first head of state in independent, post-colonial, well, independent Ghana in West Africa. And he fought seriously, furiously, incessantly to try to unite Africa as part of the process of the liberation of African people worldwide. And he came later to understand that this struggle for African liberation was a critical component of the struggle for overturning the colonial capitalist social system altogether. And so we talk about Nkrumah's efforts, and we were just speaking of at the last session, Nkrumah's struggle that he took to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia in May of 1963, where the imperialist forces deploying neo-colonial entities, Black people from the continent of Africa itself, who had become important due to imperialist colonial machinations. They had become important. They had become heads of these artificial entities that they call states in Africa. And Nkrumah had to really struggle to try to unite Africa, and the imperialists trying to get ahead of that. Nkrumah had a really important meeting in 1958 in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, trying to pull together this united force at a time where the anti-colonialist resistance was growing globally. We had seen it expressed in various places on the African continent. And of course, 1968, 58, it had heated up inside the United States as well. And there were Africans from the United States who lived in the United States at the time who attended this meeting in 1958 that was called by Nkrumah in Accra, Ghana. So now in Nkrumah 1963, he is faced with the efforts to prevent this unification of Africa, and with this meeting that happened on May 24th and 25th. And this meeting would result in what was characterized as the Organization of African Unity, that many people extol today, many Africans do, who think that it was symbolic or representative of some kind of real unity of African people in the struggle against our oppression, and not knowing that the real struggle that was being waged against our oppression was a struggle that was made in many ways against what the OAU became, and that was led by Kwame Nkrumah, who fought furiously during the meeting of the Organization of African Unity to have them reject the notion of the borders, to have them recognize and come out of that meeting with a united African union of African union of one Africa under one leadership with one state. And Nkrumah was not determined to be that one leadership. He just was determined that it should happen if we were going to avoid becoming tools of colonialism in its new face. And that's what he characterized as neo-colonialism. It's not colonialism gone, it's neo-colonialism. It has, in many ways, the appearance of disappeared colonialism. That's what made it new, a neo-colonialism, where the white man didn't necessarily stand over you with the gun. He had an African, somebody who looks like you and eats the same food and knows the same dances and, as you, to stand over you with the gun in the name of what's supposed to be your freedom, although this person, this entity now is colonialism just with a black face, still shoveling out our resources to white power, still making sure that the masses of our people are left in a disorganized, ununited state of poverty and oppression. So Nkrumah made that argument, and we spoke to that. And we said that how we spoke to the problem that Nkrumah had, and then on page 63 we said that of the Organization of African Unity, it was the meeting that codified the unity and progress prohibiting colonial borders. Our party, like Nkrumah before us, is determined to eradicate. This is the first complete sentence on the top of the page of 63. Speaking of that meeting, the OEU, it said that this meeting, it was a meeting that codified, that made more or less legal the unity and progress prohibiting colonial borders that our party, like Nkrumah before us, is determined to eradicate. Unlike Nkrumah, however, we have the African People's Socialist Party, the advanced detachment of the African working class, and the organizational vehicle through which this is being accomplished. Also, unlike Nkrumah at the time, we know that the true liberation and unification of Africa and Africans will not occur as the achievement of neo-colonial heads of states, but of our revolutionary party based in the African working class. The opportunist neo-colonialism that functions as an agent of imperialism, as white power in blackface, must be removed with finality if the misery of our people is to be ended and Africa and our people are to ever be free and prosperous. I want to just read that again, that the opportunist neo-colonialism that functions as an agent of imperialism, as white power in blackface, must be removed with finality if the misery of our people is to be ended and Africa and our people are to ever be freed and prosperous. And I'm saying this in anticipation of the usual question, well, what about this leader in this country, or something to that effect? What we're saying is that neo-colonialism is an opportunism. It's opportunism. It's sacrificing the long-term interests of Africa and African people for total unification and liberation. There is never going to be any freedom. There is never going to be any liberation. There is never going to be any unity of African people as long as neo-colonialism, that is a white power in blackface, continues to exist. And the institution of its reproduction, that is to say neo-colonialism, is these artificial borders that have been created by white power, for white power, and at the expense of the masses of African people, and particularly the African working class. Because it's only we effectively who have been divided by these borders, who have been separated from each other by the borders. The neo-colonial puppet leaders, unless they are contesting for the same same resources from some European or increasingly Chinese power or another, they get along fabulously. They meet regularly. They, hang out in these international arenas, and the hospitals that they don't provide for African people on the continent, they don't worry about that. It's only you who have to worry about that. They go to the hospital in France. They go to the hospital in the United States or Saudi Arabia and other places like that. They don't build hospitals for us. So we suffer. And this sector, this neo-colonial puppet, this vicious neo-colonial puppet sub-parasites that carries out the will and interests of white power and them. And I want to say that we're not just talking about white power having these interests. White power has given them a stake. They get a piece of the action for carrying out the will of white power. This is neo-colonialism. And with the Organization of African Unity, what we had was a consolidation of a neo-colonial reality that's imposed on Black people all around the world. And in so doing, they initiated a process that would shut the door, if you would, they would slam the door in the face of Africans all around the world who now, for sure,
don't have a place because the only places there are those which were consolidated with this OAU meeting that happened in 1963. And we will remind you that people like Nkrumah himself, he went to school with African people in the United States. And there were other forces like that throughout the African world that were in contact with each other. But now we were in contact with each other as Africans. Now the door has been slammed in the face, and this neocolonial opportunist entity has been imposed on African people. So every place you see Africans located around the world where there is any semblance of what we'd call organization and government, generally speaking, certainly it's true in almost absolute terms in Africa, certainly it's true in almost absolute terms and most of the Americas and Caribbean, but in the United States, what we have is the so-called leadership also being a kind of domestic neo-colonialism. So, and it meant that much of what Africans would be doing now, it has been in the United States and in other parts of the world would be internalized, would be domesticated. So that whereas in the past, Africans who lived in Jamaica, who saw a future that was somehow connected to Africa through somebody like Haile Selassie, perhaps, or Africans who lived in other places around the world who were able to see liberated Africa increasingly seeing ourselves having to find solutions where we are. It's a domesticated kind of response to a global contradiction, or as Marcus Garvey might have said, to a universal contradiction that African people are confronted with. So we say, Africa for Africans at home and abroad. The deployment of US troops on African soil, enhanced with the establishment of the US Africa Command, or AFRICOM, is resulting in armed clashes that will serve to draw the US deep into an inescapable quagmire. US and France are both actively engaged in military engagements spanning the continent. While these are generally secret wars, unknown to much of the world outside Africa, occasionally the escalating conflicts break through the self-imposed censorship of bourgeois democratic colonial media. Just think about this. I mean, what explanation can you have for the United States having bases all over the continent of Africa, chasing and killing people, setting up drone headquarters that's being used to kill people in the name of freedom? What freedom? I mean, here's the United States government that we're talking about. This is not some extraterrestrial force that has, with no interest inside the United States or in the world, that has imposed this fight. This is the United States government that's killing people, Black people on the continent of Africa. At the very same time, the same government has initiated rebellions throughout the United States by Black people, African people, who are being killed by the domestic forces, armed forces of the United States government. And so here the United States government and neo-colonialism and the different worldviews that's been imposed on us through fracturing our identity, what have you, through imposing false identity, national identities on African people, it can occur with impunity. Those are many of the people who you find killing Black people on the continent of Africa in the employ of the United States government, Africans who had to leave the United States to join the US military, colonial military forces to keep from being killed on the streets of Chicago and Milwaukee and Florida and Texas and all these other places. These are people who are now working for the same imperial power, killing other Black people. That's what we are confronted with. So, and that's ridiculous. I mean, you cannot even give a good explanation for how can the United States get away telling you, how can Biden or or Trump or Obama or any of them get away telling you that the United States government is killing Black people, making war all over the continent of Africa, somehow to help Black people on the continent of Africa. Fighting against terrorism, they call it. When the biggest terrorists we know are the military forces of the United States government, whether they're functioning in Africa, Syria, Palestine, Afghanistan, or whether they're functioning in Houston, Texas. This is an imperial military force, and this is something that African internationalism teaches us, and why it's important for us to continue the kind of discussion we're having now. So we say that France has long been a detested, blood-drenched colonial power in Africa and owes its affluence and influence, though declining, to the hundreds-year-long colonial looting expedition and the continuing French military occupation of huge swaths of African territory. Think about this. How many Africans, artists and what have you, left the United States because of the deplorable conditions imposed on the United States directly by colonial powers here, and ended up in France and became celebrities and actually became another African influence on what French society would look like, French culture would look like. So you have all these Africans doing that. At the same time, the same France was killing colonized African people in Africa. At the very same time, we are there, and somehow this false national identity will allow us to be Africans, be Americans, so to speak, or Negroes, or African Americans, or however else we're being characterized. At the same time, here we are in France, and the same France that's murdering African people, stealing everything that Black people have, stealing it, looting it. At the same time this is happening, you know, France can, we go to France, and in many ways by going to France, running from racism, you know, finding some element of freedom. At the same time this happens, we validate France as a colonial power, whether we intend to or not. So we say that the growing resistance to French occupation in Africa recently made the news when in November 2019, Reuters reported that French President Emmanuel Macron publicly responded to the combat deaths of more than 13 French occupation troops in Mali by making an empty threat to pull French troops out of the African Sahel. Now, they said French troops, but I don't know how many of those so-called French troops were Africans. Somebody said that years ago when France, they have this Arch of Triumph in Paris, and this is a monumental, this arch that they put up to, that represents, you know, the symbolic of France and what France is, etc. That years ago, they had a ceremony where they were digging up the unknown soldier that some, you know, under the Arch of Triumph or something like that. And they quickly reburied it because it turned out that it was a Senegalese, an African from Senegal, who was the unknown soldier buried there. And that speaks volumes about how the colonial powers have been able to deploy Africans who are colonized by them in wars and war efforts to fight other peoples and other countries, and sometimes and most times other colonized people for the protection of France in the name of French democracy, etc. So anyway, Macron responded to the combat deaths of more than 13 French occupation troops in Mali by making an empty threat to pull French troops out of the African Sahel, implying that France has taken up the white man's burden in Africa. Macron demanded assistance from Europe to crush the growing resistance to continued French slavery, declaring, and here's a quote, "France is acting in the Sahel on everyone's behalf." And he's talking to Europe now. He's saying, we are making this war for white power. Of course, parasite that it is, France cannot afford to leave Africa. To do so would cut off his lifeline. There are 14 so-called independent countries in Africa that continue to pay a colonial tax to France of 65% of their foreign reserves, something they have done since formal independence in the 1960s. When handling charges at commercial rates are paid to France, that is the handling charges, the charges that are paid to France for handling this 65% of the foreign reserves. When those charges at commercial rates are paid to France, the total taken from these territories is at least 85% of their gross domestic product. This is France. France cannot leave Africa except at the expense of this pretext of self-generated wealth and civilization. Every sidewalk cafe in France has African poverty and immiseration on the menu, not something easily given up by the French rulers or citizens. In October 2017, 4 US Special Operations troops were killed in Niger during a military encounter that has never been truthfully explained by US officials to the public. And as recently as early January 2020, 3 US forces were killed and several US aircrafts and vehicles destroyed by African militants in Kenya. We have written more in the past about the armed US thugs marauding throughout Africa, murdering our people at will. These are the thugs which, when they are deployed in the US, are called police and serve the same purpose of colonial containment and domination. The point is, however, that more and more of the imperialist forces are being drawn into Africa, where with the growth of the African Socialist International, the working class party, we will be able to coordinate a continental and global campaign from which they will not be able to live with colonialism or their lives intact. The point is, however, that more and more of the imperialist forces are being drawn into Africa, where with the growth of the African Socialist International, the working class party, we will be able to coordinate a continental and global campaign from which they will not be able to live with colonialism or their lives intact. The neo-colonial hobnobbing with the imperialist overlords deployed by Nkrumah will not be able to save imperialism and its minions from the organized African internationalist ideologically armed African working class in pursuit of the future of our continent and our people in Africa and around the world. The 2, 3, many Vietnams that Che Guevara called for as the means to defeat US imperialism by forcing it to fight everywhere simultaneously are to be found in Africa, where all the blood-sucking imperialist powers are greedily huddled together in anticipation of further looting. The capitalist state, as distinguished from prior European states, was spawned by European imperialism or empire. It was spawned by the process of capturing the lands and peoples that constituted the fodder of European development. This brought about the advent of capitalism as a parasitic, life-extracting growth on the body of Africa and the rest of humanity. The capitalist state is international in scope, and it represents itself in Africa in a slew of ways that include NATO, the United Nations, and assorted peacekeeping and relief missions. However, the primary, most important expression of the white power capitalist state in Africa is the African governments. Their main role is to protect the parasitic relationship that starves and brutalizes Africa and facilitates the perennial transfer of African human and material resources to the coffers and bellies of condescending colonizers. This is neo-colonialism, or indirect rule that has been imposed on Africa at gunpoint. The African, mostly puppet regimes, do not represent the interests of African people, but those of the capitalist governments, corporations, and the African primitive petty bourgeoisie. Neither the borders nor the governments of Africa are legitimate, as they owe their existence and loyalty to imperialist white power and not to Africa and our people. Neither the borders nor the governments of Africa are legitimate, as they owe their existence and loyalty to imperialist white power and not to Africa and our people. The African Socialist International is the organization of the African working class, which, when it seizes power, will become the new socialist state, the workers in arms, that will mark the beginning stage of the demise of capitalism on a world scale. We must make this point loudly and clearly. Africa for Africans at home and abroad. The 100-year-old pronouncement by Marcus Garvey has more significance now than ever. We will make that slogan a living demand by Africans worldwide through the work and presence of the African People's Socialist Party in every nook, cranny, and crevice of every territory in which we reside within the imperialist construct. This determination, especially when adopted by the masses, neutralizes the pretensions of the so-called official borders. We have no borders. We have no borders. And our country is currently under construction by the African masses under the leadership of the advanced detachment. So building for the first international conference in Azania 2023. The party is still working to build the African Socialist International nearly 40 years after the 1981 First Party Congress held in Oakland, California, where the resolution was passed by party members that officially put us on this trajectory. After so many years of ups and downs, the African Socialist International is now solidly on the ground. Our organizational presence as a party has shifted from time to time, but we are here. Our ASI leading body is becoming increasingly competent. The work our party is doing throughout the US is real. We do exist and engage in political work in the Bahamas and Ghana, England, and various locations in Europe. The party's presence in neo-colonial South Africa is a major contributing factor to the growth and stability of the leadership structure of the African Socialist International. This leading structure also consists of representation from Holland, France, England, Ghana, West Africa, the Bahamas, and the US. This is the structure that is carrying out the responsibility for building fronts or sections of the African People's Socialist Party as the African Socialist International throughout the world. So this is just some of the places where we are located. We are located in many more places than what was mentioned in this political report. And also, as suggested here, there have been ups and downs in terms of this development. We don't exist in some places as an organized formation that we did 5 years ago. But we exist in more places today that we didn't exist in 5 years ago. And there's going to be this up and down process of building building the African Socialist International, building a global presence of an organized capacity to fight against imperialism and to fight for power over our own lives. But the fact is that we have consolidated the vehicle. The African Socialist International is real. The African Socialist International leading body is real. It continues to prove itself day in and day out, not just through some talk fest, not just through studies, but they're actually engaged in work on the ground in the various places where Africans are located, whether that's in Paris or whether that's in Folkville and what they call South Africa, or whether that's in Houston and what they call Texas. So as we said, that in addition to its work to build the party's organized presence throughout the world, and especially the continent of Africa, the ASI leading body will begin preparing for our first International Congress in South Africa in 2023. This will be an historic, monumental event that will take the African Revolution to never achieved heights. It will be critical to our practical work to build one border negating Africa and consolidation of the African nation. We will do this because only the African People's Socialist Party can do this. We will do this because we can. International Tribunal for Reparations to African people. Years ago, we initiated the process to launch an International Reparations Tribunal, initially in Berlin, Germany, a location chosen because of its role in the 1884-85 European division of Africa into the existing non-tenable territories called countries. And we were characterizing it as a return to the scene of the crime. In October 2005, we joined with African representatives of 13 other countries in Berlin to begin organizing to build the International Tribunal for Reparations to African People that we characterize as ITRAP, the International Tribunal for Reparations to African People, to be held in Berlin in June 2007. So in October 2005, we joined with representatives of 13 other countries in Berlin, African representatives of 13 other countries in Berlin, to begin organizing to build the International Tribunal for Reparations to African People, to be held in Berlin in June of 2007. Representatives at that meeting came from the United Kingdom, United States, Germany, Holland, France, Ghana, Angola, Democratic Republic of Congo, British Virgin Islands, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Uganda, Ethiopia, and Israel. The party was not strong enough at the time to build the tribunal alone. And the ASI had not developed this international leading body. Today, the African Socialist International leadership structure has increased its ability to make the International Tribunal feasible and worth considering before or as a consequence of our 2023 International Congress. Based on the party's proposal for building the tribunal at the time, the conditions are as ripe today as then for convening the tribunal, if not more so. Speaking of the resistance defining the world at the time, the tribunal proposal proclaimed, this is 2005, even, quote, even in the height of this crisis caused by the people's resistance, the participation of African people in this struggle as a conscious, united force is non-existent. Indeed, the struggle of African people is incoherent. Africans are generally regarded by the rest of the world as charity cases. The legitimate struggle of African people is assumed to be over. And we are all regarded as either unappreciative recipients of the sacrificial generosity of white people and their governments, victims of our own corrupt leaders, or self-inflicted casualties of resource mismanagement. That's how we are perceived today. This is a far cry from the 1960s, when the struggle of African people at home and abroad constituted the leading element in the struggle against imperial white power. Then, the future of Africa and her children scattered abroad was bright. Like others around the world, we anticipated liberation within our lifetime. This was before the imperialist-inspired coups in Africa that resulted in the loss of some of our greatest champions, such as Kwame Nkrumah and Patrice Lumumba. This was before the imprisonment and death of Mangaliso Sobukwe by the white settler colonial regime of South Africa. This was before the success of the counterinsurgency that defeated the Black Revolution of the 60s in the US and elsewhere, and the successful advent of neo-colonialism in Africa and within the imperialist countries themselves. Today, while our lives and existence are severely compromised by imperialist avarice, our people are disorganized and without a vision of the future. The unity of our people globally has been fractured. And there is no recognized or agreed upon strategic trajectory that would give our movement the necessary coherence to thrust us back into our rightful place in the struggle to reclaim our resources, our sovereignty, our land, and our dignity. This proposal is to initiate the World Conference on Reparations for African People in Berlin in June 2007, will provide us a major unifying thrust in this struggle, World Tribunal. Unquote. That's the end of that quote. So then reading further, we said that the African Socialist International, the International African People's Socialist Party, is the only organization capable of building the World Tribunal on Reparations for African People. This meeting in 2005, as 15 years ago, as I mentioned, was one that was attended by representatives from something like 13 different countries, Africans. And what has become increasingly clear to us over the many decades of our work is that this issue of is the relationship of class to this question of unifying the African forces and the African liberation movement. It is always there, this question of class. It always intrudes into what it is that we're attempting to do. And the reality is that there are various different organizations essentially because of the class position that exists within the African life, that this has been structured into our reality by our relationship with this external imperialist force that has actually connected sectors of the African population to to imperialism itself in a way that gives sectors of the African population a stake, a relationship, a connection, a stake in the ongoing existence of the system itself, even if not to the particular imperialist force, that colonialist force that dominates Africa today. And that has always been a factor that has either immediately in terms of what they perceive or what exists as a state, or the perception of a future that requires a relationship to the structures of imperialism as they exist, or to white power, or the kind of social system that might be in blackface. So we were going to go to Berlin initially, and the party, put forth a lot of resources, traveling and holding meetings in Berlin and various other places in the world to try and pull this together. And in Berlin, we thought we had a splendid opportunity of doing this. And in the middle of this thing, that we discovered that comrades were only participating because they thought that coming from the US, Africans coming from the US would have money, and that there was going to be money available, and they themselves, some of them, not they, I can't say they, but a leading force in Germany understood that and actually stated it when struggle developed, that exposed the disunity that this comrade had with the process. This is what made it impossible for us to be in Berlin, because this was the primary contact in Germany, and that was going to facilitate this process. So it couldn't happen like that. But there are other instances and other forces who had a completely different understanding that was tied to either the promise of a relationship, an ongoing relationship with imperialism, just like when we talk about reparations today as an example, how people talk about reparation, you can have unity around the general question of reparations, but what that's going to look like, what that means, is entirely determined by what the worldview of the forces who are demanding reparations, what the outcome of this thing is supposed to be. From the party reparations has to be a function of the revolution. We're not trying to find a more comfortable place under imperialist, foreign, alien, colonial domination of Black people. And our approach to the question of the World Tribunal, of the Reparations Tribunal, and building this international capacity for African people to pursue resources stolen from Africa and African people was not an attempt to try to find a place under the existing social system, but one that would promote an assault, a generalized assault on the social system by masses who would have been awakened through the process of doing the kind of work we're talking about. So the work that we tried to do this with was impossible. So at one time it was the International Tribunal on Reparations for African People, ITRAP. Then we had to regroup. And at another time it became the World, which was ITRAP. Another time it became the World Tribunal for Reparations for African People, WeTrap, et cetera. But the point is that it couldn't happen within the context of this diverse, this ideologically diverse organization, politically diverse group. And so now the party, which was the initiator of the process in the first place, it was we who called this meeting together, where the representatives from the 13 countries came, and now it is we who will have to fulfill this mission that has been imposed on the African working class by history itself. And so now the working class, armed to the teeth with an African internationalist philosophy that is being realized, that has been concretized in the process of the African Socialist International, which is the African People's Socialist Party that now is in the possession increasingly of African workers of the world. So we say the African Socialist International, the International African People's Socialist Party is the only organization capable of building the World Tribunal on Reparations for African people. We are the only force with the organized presence throughout the African world and the advanced guiding theory to do this. We are the only organization that is compelled by the historically based quest for total liberation and unification of Africa and African people to do the tribunal. We are compelled by the quest for the total liberation and unification of African people to do the tribunal. All of it, every square inch of Africa and every square inch of territories in many instances outside of Africa that can be legitimately characterized and come into a relationship with the African-based state power of Black people. So the initial 2005 proposal for the tribunal offered a basis for the tribunal that only our party can truly appreciate its contribution for forging a revolutionary path. We are the only ones can appreciate the contribution that this tribunal that we talked about would make for forging a revolutionary path. The proposal lays out objectives that resonate today, although some assumptions of what the tribunal committees we had created then can obviously only be carried out by our party in the revolutionary process of claiming our Africa and our future. And I'm going to quote now. This is a statement of the objectives for that tribunal. That was laid out in 2005. Quote, the objectives of the International Tribunal are manifold. First of all, the tribunal must be a tool for uniting African people in our liberation struggle worldwide. It must mobilize us all as conscious participants in a coherent trajectory of historic significance. Another objective must be to unite all the gallant reparations organizations and movements worldwide in a common effort that will enhance the significance of all our work and build the necessary practical global relationships and networks necessary for our success. A third objective of the tribunal is to give Africans worldwide the practical vehicle with which to actualize the unity discovered in Durban around the reparations issue. Fourth, the reparations tribunal will allow the international African community to achieve a common explanation for the conditions of existence we are confronted with everywhere we are located as a people. Fifth, the work to build the reparations tribunal can contribute to the necessary organizational unity to build our liberation struggle based on practical activity as opposed to simply being united around abstract ideas. A sixth objective would be to institute the tribunal as a permanent fixture for the ongoing discovery and exposition of the historical and current bases and consequences of the enslavement and colonization of Africa and African people. This can be seen as the embryonic stage of the emergent all-African state power necessary for the ultimate liberation and unification of Africa and African people, and the defender of our rights, resources, and existence. A seventh objective will be to end the isolation of the various African communities throughout the world and the struggle to advance the interests of the people wherever they exist. Eighth, the tribunal will enable us to begin an actual quantification of the value of the human and material resources stolen from Africa and other places Africans were colonized, as well as the value of our expropriated labor within the highly industrialized imperialist centers, in addition to physical, psychological, and cultural damage. A ninth objective will be to mobilize masses of African people around the reparations issue, bring the African workers and poor into political life through active participation in the struggle to take back for our own use the capacity to produce and reproduce real life for ourselves. And finally, an objective will be to put the entire white world on the defensive around the reparations issue, robbing any particular imperialist state of the ability to easily find refuge under the moral or the legal umbrella of another when faced with the reparations demand by local movements, unquote. So this is a campaign that can contribute to spreading the theory of African internationalism and the African People's Socialist Party worldwide. Within the ASI leadership structure, we must give serious consideration to taking this project on. Indeed, it may very well be that the 2023 Party Congress in South Africa is the perfect vehicle for initiating the tribunal under the leadership of the party. This could represent the advancement and fulfillment of the Durban Conference of 2001. All our work, wherever, everywhere, is designed to fulfill our mission as the advanced detachment. What this means, as spelled out in our Seventh Congress and in this, our first plenary, is that we must put the party down on the ground throughout the world through utilizing our regional strategy for building local party organizations and units to snatch up all the political, organizational, and ideological space wherever Africans are positioned on earth. While we have to work out the logistics, resources, and structures for this, I'm putting APSP Occupy Tanzania President Tafari Mugeri in place to organize the party in various locations on the African continent. He will function as director of organization, possibly for all of Africa, something to be determined by the ASI leading body. However, right now, Comrade Tafari is being proposed to travel to Ghana to assist in building the party's presence there. I want to say that Comrade Tafari, this young comrade, has done an incredible job, even under conditions of the colonial virus that is affecting us everywhere. He has led the work putting the party in place in Uganda, Tanzania, Nigeria, consolidating us in Ghana and and in Sierra Leone, where we've been located for a long time. Of course, in South Africa itself, and there are other places that he is working, and some of which I've left out, which makes it problematic to have even mentioned some of it. But with Mali, I think Chad, Ivory Coast, and what have you. This is the work that this comrade has been leading on the continent of Africa itself. So I know this comrade has his work cut out for him in South Africa. However, he's clearly demonstrated dedication to our party over everything else, and his firm unity with African internationalism as the guiding advanced revolutionary theory of these times, along with the practical work he leads in South Africa that gives truth to his commitment, makes Tafari the logical cadre to take this task on at this critical moment in our history. The African Socialist International is beginning to take real organizational form. Secretary General Louisa Kinshasa has done an outstanding job in winning followers of the Uhuru movement throughout Europe and Africa at different times. The ideological work he has done through participation in various political actions, especially revolving around Congo, his place of birth, but also through his writings and regular live streaming of our ideas and actions in French and Lingala, contributes to greater development and support of African internationalism. Comrade Louisa has been a mainstay in the work to build the ASI in Europe and Africa. Now we have a more inclusive ASI leading body, and Tafari as the director of organization helps concretize our organizational presence. The future is ours as the advanced detachment. Key to this, of course, is the success the Secretary General can achieve in building a support staff in his office. So I'm going to cease right now. I think, Comrade Director, and we can see where we are and whether we should go ahead and open it up for discussion with the people who are participating here. Uhuru.
Chairman, yes, we have some questions coming in, so want to be able to take those in, but I just really want to appreciate this incredible study and appreciate your leadership. And if for those who are, want their questions answered during this portion, please type them into the Facebook and YouTube chat right now. And before we get into the first couple of questions that have come in, I want to acknowledge where people are watching from. So we have Dearborn, Michigan, Riverview, Florida, Richmond, Virginia, Pinellas Park, Florida, St. Louis, Missouri, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, St. Petersburg, Florida, Irvington, New Jersey, Chicago, Illinois, Jamaica, Brooklyn, New York, San Diego, California, Kuwait, Atlanta, Georgia, Tennessee, Boston, Massachusetts, Los Angeles, California, Lakeland, Florida, Newark, New Jersey, Kingston, New York, Birmingham, Alabama, Ava, Missouri, Detroit, Michigan, Houston, Texas, Athens, Ohio, Orlando, Florida, Gainesville, Florida, Hempstead, New York, Occupied Azania, South Africa, Wichita, Kansas, Berlin, Germany, London, UK, and Minneapolis, Minnesota tuned in with us today. So Huru, comrades, where you're watching from. All right, so our first question came in from Jonas Conwald on YouTube. And Jonas asked, do you think the ANC has given up the class struggle? ANC, I believe, is the African National Congress.
Has given up the class struggle.
Yeah, that's what the question is.
No, it hasn't given up the class struggle. It's just on the wrong side and always has been on the wrong side of the class struggle. In fact, it was how this class struggle within South Africa. Remember, for a while in South Africa, the two recognized legitimate organization that represented the interest of African people there were the African National Congress and the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania. These were the leading bodies, and they were contenders in so many ways for the leadership of that revolutionary process there. And what happened, of course, in the 1950s, we saw the African National Congress under the influence of Joe Slovo, who was the leader of the South African Communist Party that had become notorious at one juncture. I don't think this was during Slovo's tenure of making the declaration, workers of South Africa unite to keep South Africa white. That was the Communist Party at that time. And even though it didn't maintain that overt kind of stance, objectively speaking, it didn't change that much. And Slovo participated and perhaps wrote what was called the Freedom Charter, that the ANC adopted. And one of the part of what the Freedom Charter that's recognized universally by every liberal, existing liberal, as this great democratic document, part of what it declares is that South Africa belongs to all who lives here. And both the oppressor and the oppressed. So, and when the critical feature of African oppression in what they call South Africa was the theft of our land, and even today in South Africa we have a situation where white people own more than 80% of the land in that territory, and this after the so-called ANC-led revolutionary struggle. So. The split developed in the ANC, led by the head of the youth wing of the ANC, Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe, and who was influenced by Nkrumah and may have attended the 1958 meeting in Accra, Ghana, that I just talked about earlier. And if you look at the logo of the Pan-African Congress of Azania, you will see that a feature of it is a silhouette of Africa with a star, and that star is right where Ghana is, with rays, leaving Ghana, and that was Nkrumah, and that was the influence of Nkrumah and what have you. So this and other developments within the African National Congress, the Freedom Charter, led to Sobukwe and others splitting from the ANC and creating the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania. So from historically, there has never been a time, and this is not just true in South Africa, but in many instances you will find that freedom struggles at some juncture saw themselves as winning their freedom as within the broad context of the existing social system, not overturning, not destroying it. I mean, even the statement that became famous for Mandela during his so-called trial was that all my life I have been opposed to Black oppression and white oppression, as if there was ever a time where Black people ever oppressed white people in South Africa. I mean, it was never committed to the total liberation of Africa and African people and the destruction of those borders. In many ways, the African National Congress functioned as the mass organization of the Communist Party of South Africa. Of course, going into power, white people couldn't take power there. So you had this tripod, I forgot how they characterized this coalition of labor, of the South African Communist Party, and I don't remember what you would call and the African National Congress, and it was the South African Communist Party that had all of the for most of its existence, and had the support also in connection with the international communist movement that raised up Mandela and the ANC, helped it to publish journals that were international and what have you. Most people knew nothing about the Pan-African Congress of Azania. And so Mandela and ANC were, projected as this glorious historic force out there by Sobukwe. And many people think that the Sharpeville massacre was something that was a consequence of an ANC activity. It was PAC that mobilized that action in Sharpeville and Langa province that saw our people gunned down and what have you, and it thrust the South African question into greater visibility for people who may not have known about the oppression of our people there. So I don't think the ANC has left the class question. I just think it's always been on the wrong side of the class question. And that's being exposed more and more by the existence, not just of this discussion we're having, but the fact that the African People's Socialist Party, the ASI, is on the ground in South Africa actively right now in the very townships where the ANC had land and resource. The ANC had conceded to the settlers with that so-called Freedom Charter, Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman. Then that question was from Jonas Conwald on YouTube.
Jonas is in where? Where did you say he was in Berlin?
Did Jonas say where he was from? Yeah. Yes, Berlin, Germany. Yep.
Oh, Berlin. Okay.
Yep. All right. So thank you, Jonas, and thank you, Chairman, again for that answer. Our next question comes from
Sharon Dunk, Jonas. Go ahead.
Our next question comes from Comrade Sobek in Los Angeles, California. And Sobek asks, is our demand for reparations, does that include the demand for our land, Africa?
Let me just say a couple of things. First, I'm told somebody commented on the shirt that I wore in the last study. And it was the shirt with the big red star. So that shirt, by the way, I got from Comrade Sobek. So Sobek, if people are interested in the shirt, you can put in the comment section how they can contact you to get that shirt. But the question of reparations includes everything. And you know, a real revolutionary stance around the reparations issue, a stance based on a real historical materialist investigation of this relationship that gave rise to the demand for reparations, has to come to the conclusion that there is nothing that has been created under imperialism that could have happened without expropriating value, land, what have you, human and material resources from Africa and African people. Land is an aspect of it. Now, when you talk about land, much of this, and the land question is a critical question. Malcolm X talked about it all along, that people are running around here talking about freedom and revolution. Revolution is based on land. You know, that's the place where you grow your food and create your factories, and your culture is rooted, you know, like in land and what have you. And I don't mean in New Jersey. I don't mean that, and I'm not being facetious when I say that. I mean that the culture of African people is deeply entrenched in Africa, and the millennia of history that we made in Africa in the process of becoming who the hell we are. That didn't happen in New Jersey. We had some experiences in New Jersey that might make us nostalgic for the past, but that's because we have lost memory in many instances of the source of our becoming, of who we are. So the land question is really important. And I mean, there's a great battle that's happening right now in Bethesda, Maryland, being led by comrades like Marsha Coleman Adebayo around these graves that of Black people that have been paved over, and they are putting parking lots and other kinds of entities on top of them in total disregard and just disregard for African people. And everywhere you look, when we talk about things like gentrification. Well, you know, gentrification is a term that came from England, and where the gentry of perhaps the Middle Ages, the gentry, you know, dislocated some other people living in England. But the reality is, if you want to talk about gentrification, what the hell can you call South Africa? Where white people leave and kick out all of the people and what do you call the United States? The U.S. itself, the land of the indigenous people, where the white people come and kick the people out and stick them in you can't call it a housing project, which themselves are nothing but concentration camps, but into concentration camps called Indian reservations. The reality is the emergence and ongoing existence of capitalism came about as a consequence of stealing land from people. So land is a fundamental component of it. And it's part of what's taken me a long time getting to this is because it doesn't mean the same thing all the time. For example, there are Africans who want to claim a land in the United States based on some relatively recent historical relationship that we have to it. I say relatively recent, yes, and I know that you can go back and you can find that Africans were on this territory, 1,000 years ago. But any place there are human beings, you can find Africans were there first. So that's not the question. The question is that the situation that we are confronted with right now, in this moment in history, has its origin in not the dispossession of Africans from this land that we in the United States, but the dispossession of the indigenous people who've been stuck in these concentration camps, and Africans, generally speaking. So that's part of what for some complicates the question of land. It doesn't for us at all. So yeah, land is a fundamental aspect of the question of reparations, and reparations is really something that ultimately will be achieved. Sitting around a table or standing around a table of surrender, signing documents of surrender, and from the colonizer. The colonized who come to power will ultimately set the terms for what reparation looks like and what it means, not the colonizer, Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you so much, Chairman. Definitely really appreciate that answer. And thank you to Comrade Sobek for that question. He had another one, but I will take it after we take some more questions. So the next question comes from Chad Kenyatta. Chad asks, is the EFF still making progress on the political front in South Africa today?
I don't know what that means, except, do you mean, are they increasing in significance as compared or at the expense of the ANC? There's probably some truth to that, but everything is making progress. And I'm not being facetious here now compared to the ANC. The neo-colonial rule, no matter how militant it appears to be at any given time, neo-colonial rule is connected to the colonial powers. And it is full of rot. It cannot speak to the interests of the masses of the people, and it breeds corruption. It continues the corruption that existed under colonial domination. It results in ethnic groups fattening their own coffers and those of their cousins and things like that. It results, it really demoralizes the population. I mean, you think about this, and at one time, what was called South Africa, much of what people expected of the African Revolution was concentrated there, and people had great expectations all around the world. Africans, rallied around the cause of South Africa, and what's the word, Johannesburg, Gil Scott Heron, and what have you. It just became famous for this center of resistance. But what happened is that with this betrayal of the African Revolution that's represented by the African National Congress, including Nelson Mandela, this betrayal demoralized huge sectors of the African population. So, I was there something like 14 years after the end of apartheid, and even the ruling white people's media were proclaiming that African people, after 14 years later, was something like 18–19% worse off than the white people. This is after the revolution, so-called revolution, and the land was still owned by the white people. And even some major bourgeois journals, or not just journals, but journals tied to capital, declared that Nelson Mandela and the ANC sold the Black people out there. So, so the people, find themselves in this situation where the revolution that's supposed to free us has left us in worse misery than before we were in under white power. Even if you look at these shacks that the ANC supposedly created for the masses of our people, they're worse. They were worse than the shacks that had been created by the previous apartheid regime. So the people are left in dire straits, living in these concentration camps on our own land, where the white people who stole the land have owned thousands and thousands of acres. You can drive through South Africa and see all this land that's there, and yet African people are stuck on this pitiful patch of land that we've been bequeathed by the African National Congress and this fake revolution that they were involved in. So what happens? Now they say the biggest problem in South Africa is crime. And so at one juncture, Africans picked up the gun, were willing to pick up the gun to chase out our oppressors so that we could eat, so that we could feed, clothe, and house ourselves. And then after the revolution, we're left with this situation where the gun wielders, those who are controlling the guns and to maintain the status quo, are Black people. And so, yes, you see a degeneration there of people, dealing with so-called crime, et cetera, but that we don't see a generalized movement to overturn this relationship. And that's what, and so the EFF that is able to talk about nationalizing this and nationalizing that, it's not worth a bucket of spit. And I can say this because nationalization is not the question in and of itself, because the question is what class is in power? So if you nationalize the land and the mines and things like that, and something like that, I think even existed under apartheid, and the same class is in power, it doesn't mean anything. The nationalization is significant because the working class now becomes the owning class, the ruling class. And all the resources now belong to this social force. So you have a lot of militancy coming from the EFF, and with its own history as beginning as a part of the ANC that only split from the ANC, not because of some great revelation ideologically or politically, but in the contest inside the ANC for who was going to lead the damn organization. No struggle was made up inside the ANC around any ideological or political question, but who was going to be the leader of that organization. And Malema, who had done so much work for Zuma, assumed that he would become the leader, had done so much work. He was a foot soldier for the ANC. Assumed and had got a lot of the benefits that other sectors of the ANC, I'm talking about material benefits, did not ascend to the leadership of that organization as he thought he should and would, and he created another organization. And to be successful, he created an organization that dealt with the limitations and the weaknesses and of the ANC. And so he had to flank the ANC to the left in order to pick up people to build his own presence, his own organization. That's what he did. And not as a child, and he talks about United Africa, how you make that happen. I tell you how you make that happen. You make that happen by joining the African Socialist International. So the United Africa that you're talking about, you can know it's going to come into existence because you're a part of a process, not just in South Africa, tending the resources of white power, but you're in a process that's connected to African people, masses of African people in Zimbabwe, masses of African people throughout the African continent, so that Africans who live in Zimbabwe, who are looking for resources and jobs, who cross that artificial border into what they call South Africa, will be less likely to be attacked and killed by other African people whose frame of reference continues to be that of established by the imperialists, and that the borders continue to have legitimacy. Real leadership in South Africa, as it's called, would be a part, would represent itself as assaulting even the idea of the borders that separate Africans from each other and from our resources. So, and whatever else Malema is doing, he's not talking about the elevation of the African working class to the role of the ruling class. So, so I guess he's still militant, and whatever else that question spoke to. Uhuru. Who was that from?
Chad Kenyatta.
Chad. And Chad is, where's Chad? Look at it, do you know? Chad Kenyatta.
I don't know, but if Chad,
that's
you
all
can
right.
put that in
Yeah,
there.
it's okay.
Wichita, Kansas. Wichita.
Wichita. Oh, Uhuru Chai, Wichita.
Uhuru. Well, I really appreciate that answer, Chairman. That was very clarifying. Thank you. So our next question comes from Comrade Bakri Olatunji. He is the Western Regional Representative for the African People's Socialist Party in the US. And Comrade Bakri asks, Uhuru Chairman, you spoke earlier about neo-colonialism and the class question. Can you expand on that as it relates to the overthrow of Nkrumah, Lumumba, and Sobukwe?
Thank you. Comrade Bakri has, longtime champion of ASI, of the African Internationalist champion, and has done concrete work right there in the West Coast, among other places, for a long period of time, and was active in our work when the party actually was much of the representation of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania inside this country. Much of that was the African People's Socialist Party. We did concrete work, and Bakri participated in it. But when we talk about neocolonialism and the class struggle, and part of what we were confronted with is, Nkrumah did not understand the class question until after he was overthrown. This is when he wrote this really important book about class struggle in Africa. He made certain assumptions about the ability of Africa to be united, but did not understand that neo-colonialism was something that functioned to reproduce. It was a function. It was the neo-colonialism was based inside the African petty bourgeoisie. It's a class function, and we look at the struggle to make this revolution as it has manifested itself. Understanding class struggle, you had a situation where when Nkrumah was overthrown, I think he may have been in Beijing. He was on his way to Vietnam to participate, as Africans have always done, in unity with the Vietnamese people, to participate in the whole struggle for anti-imperialist peace. And I think he may have been in Beijing when he got news that he was overthrown. So he had an entourage of maybe a couple of hundred forces, with a lot of people, let me put it that way. And almost every one of them who were with him, members of his party, went back to Ghana and left him. The only ones who did not leave him were the people who were employed by him, who were under his employ as head of state in Ghana. And you look at what happened with people like, and so they deserted him. He had no revolutionary party. He had a party, but it was not a revolutionary party. And it was not a party that understood the question of class and class struggle. Similarly, we saw prices paid for that in occupied Azania, South Africa, Sobukwe, Robert Mangalisha Sobukwe, who became attached to the Pan-Africanist movement that had certain principles that, among which were nonviolence, and who tried to utilize Nkrumah's method of coming to power through just having demonstrations that might be disruptive and upsetting and what have you. That's what the Charlottesville massacre was. And the South African and the white people gunned down scores of African people in Sharpeville and Langa province, etc., because it did not understand this question of class and how it represented itself in the real world, class domination. And based on nonviolence and based on non-recognition of the state being an expression of the ruling class that's in power. And so we got badly wounded there. And you see similar things happen. I think it was in 1967, one of the Pan-Africanist congresses, and I know there's somebody on this in this study now who's going to
correct me on this, but at one of the Pan-Africanist, it wasn't 67, it was later, Pan-Africanist Congress, that Walter Rodney, who was considered and considered himself a Pan-Africanist, wrote this scathing critique and criticism of Pan-Africanism, and because of how it always, in so many instances, ended up on the side of imperialism. So it came to understand that just being Black wasn't enough, just being all African is not enough, and what kind of class forces are we looking at, and what's going to take to win our freedom? And African internationalism, of course, is the answer to that question. And Garvey had really pioneered this understanding, even though he didn't put forth clearly the notion of the working class coming to power. All of his work was premised on the people, on the vast majority of the people, and his organization was primarily an organization of African working class, which is one of the reasons, one of the many reasons that he was despised by sectors of the African petty bourgeoisie, some of them militant, like W.E.B. Du Bois. So this class thing has always intruded in everything that we try to do, and our outcomes of what it is that we're fighting for will reflect the class worldview that we have. And and even, you know, the love affair that we have with Nyerere in Tanzania, with his, I think it was it Ujamaa, was the so-called, the socialism that he talked about, the so-called African socialism, that none of that elevated the African working class. None of them had a politic that required the destruction of the borders. Not one of them. Once in power, under this neo-colonial arrangement, and Nkrumah was absolutely correct. These entities, these false borders, became incubators for the reproduction of a particular social class, and that maintained the status quo. And this created a situation where the little armies and things like that that the imperialists put in their hands would be there to protect the status quo. And the status quo is those borders. And you have to understand the class question in order to get a grip on that. And that was one of the problems of what we characterize as Pan-Africanism in the first place. Uhuru. I know it's a long way around, Bakri. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Comrade Bakri, for that question. And Matsamela commented 6th PAC 1974 in Tanzania.
I knew you'd do it.
Okay, so our next question is coming from Regina Riley on YouTube. And Regina asked, what about the millions of Africans that have been disabled with this parasitic system? And she expounded, or they expounded, Chairman speaks much about the working class, and I'm curious, where do those who work little or not at all due to a disability, where can they fit in the movement?
Yeah, that's really important. And the class question prevails, you know, even if you're on ventilators and what have you, your location in the society is not determined by a disability. But what is determined by a class society is the value of human beings who cannot produce for capital. If you can't produce for capitalism, if you can't produce for the system, then you have no value, or you have less value than one might ordinarily have. And so that's why you see a system that is incapable, and as part of the capitalist reality, the class-based reality on colonialism, you see that there is incapable of addressing overall the conditions of well-being for the people. Because if you can't produce for the capitalists, if you can't produce for them, then you have no value. So why have anything for you? Why have any kind of care? Even people who fought wars for them. And you have these veteran administration hospitals and what have you, the worst hospitals in the world. They don't, if you were no longer any good for them, you lost a leg, you lost an eye, you lost your brains, you lost anything fighting the war, you're worthless now. So they got these things, these institutions that they call veterans hospitals that treat the people so badly. The so-called wounded warriors are worthless. They are flotsam, they are trash now. And so you have people who cannot produce effectively for capital, for colonial capitalism, and that is the consequence. So class is really important here, by which I mean, see, Stephen Hawkins, I don't know what kinds of resources he had otherwise. I don't know anything about his class upbringing, et cetera, et cetera. But Stephen Hawkins, you're not talking about ordinary people who faced with disabilities who would have the resources at their command that a Stephen Hawkins has. Why? Because Stephen Hawkins was located in a place that made him very valuable to the capitalist system. If you have no value to the capitalist system, you have no value. If you have no value to production, you have no value. That's why it is in the interest of those people who face disabilities to join with the revolution to overturn this kind of social system so that human life can have value, and that life itself is not something that is based on profits and ability to produce for capital.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman.
Listen, in our communities, this has been traditionally true. It's not that true in many places today, especially in countries like the United States. But traditionally, in our communities, African people, disabled as they're called, old as they're called, enfeebled, the community functioned as a custodian of all of our people. It wasn't whether or not you can go out and do this and that. We took care of them. Of course, that's changed dramatically in so many ways, in part because the severe poverty that's imposed on the continent of Africa that created the same kind, in many instances, mentality that you find in Europe, where scarcity was such an issue that it contributed, in my belief, to the whole emergence of the capitalist system itself. But that's been a part of our tradition and historically, and we have to fight against that to do some of the horrible things that we do in the face of the poverty that's imposed on us as African people. So there is no redeeming qualities in this kind of social system. It has to go. Even looking at something like COVID-19 or cancers and other kinds of contradictions that people are faced with, if there's no profit in it, then you're not going to see any move toward resolution for it. And when I say profit, I mean, there's greater profit in the existence of disabilities and the existence of a disease than it is in curing the disease or the disabilities or facilitating people's ability to move with the disability. Because as long as you have the disease, as long as the disability is something that impacts in a very serious way, you're going to keep coming back. You're going to keep giving resources to a predatory a capitalist social system. So yeah, I just think that's really important, Regina. This whole issue, and that's why we try to build movements, and inside our movements, we try to create processes and institutionalize an ability to take on some of these questions, even as we're moving to take power over our lives. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Regina. Our next question comes from Kamar Nasir Alamin in Kuwait, and he says, Uhuru, under the 8th point, the chairman mentions the psychological and cultural damage of colonialism and hence reparations. Can the chairman expound on what he sees as some of the psychological damage our people have experienced?
Yeah, I can't even begin to state, and perhaps to completely comprehend and understand what it means totally for a people to be snatched up and nearly completely separated from the historical foundation of our existence, to be disconnected from history and the way that colonial capitalism has done, like to us. To have a people just sort of like wandering throughout the world, disconnected from each other, which means in many ways we're disconnected from our own humanity. because it's our relationship with other people that makes us human. That's the thing that distinguishes human beings. You can't actually be a human being by yourself. It's the relationship we have, and this is something of severe disconnection that has occurred. And our identity is not based then on essentially or certainly on the surface. Our identity is not tied to our connection to each other and to history, but so much of our identity is imposed on us by our relationship we have to imperialism, to white power. And there are all kinds of issues and problems, I'm convinced, that's associated with that reality, with that certain kind of dislocation. And, you know, who we are psychologically is tied to who we are in the material world. It's that our brains and our psyche do not exist separate from our material reality. And it is the determining, most powerfully determining factor of how we come to understand the world and what we think about the world. And when you talk about psychological well-being, part of what you're talking about is how accurately what's in our brain, that is to say subjectively, how accurately it is the reflection of what's in the real world. And as you know, Comrade Nasir, so much of what is in our brain does not reflect what the real world is. It's inaccurate, and so that's part of what it is that we are talking about. And we see all kinds of issues that are defined. I mean, and you know, I think for a really better understanding of much of this, you know, we can look at like Frantz Fanon, who I think was a very brilliant person, certainly as it relates to the subjective consequences of colonialism, and who accurately understood that we experience this process psychologically, which again is a subjective thing, and the mind, the brain, and we experience this psychologically, this disease of colonialism that can only be cured. That can only be cured by the colonized killing the colonizer. That if I mean, to live under this kind of duress, under this kind of terror, under this kind of deprivation, to live every day knowing that your whole existence denies the value and validity of your ancestors, of your mama, of your daddy, knowing that this system has created all kinds of offenses that distorted your mama and your daddy's understanding of the world. To live every day knowing that here you are as a grown person in many instances who have children or will have children, and that your children have been born to or will be born to this situation of perennial, never-ending oppression. There's no end to this oppression that can be predicted within the system itself. That is a powerful incentive for psychological trauma, and even if it's unrecognized, and often it is unrecognized, in the same way that somebody who smokes cigarettes may not recognize that she's a junkie because they're so prevalent that you can get them all the time. It's only when you run out that you find yourself looking on the streets to see if somebody dropped one that you might be able to pick up or and smoke. So the rest, the mental trauma, the psychological trauma that African people experience is very real. And the way out of this is going to be a struggle, revolution, making this struggle to take back our power, to regain a relationship with our own humanity. And you are far distanced from your humanity at the point where you can live in a state of perennial disrespect, humiliation, distress, resource theft, and what have you, and not respond to it. I'm telling you, you've been actually divorced from your own humanity. And that's part of what our struggle is about, to re-achieve our humanity through making this struggle to take it back. And part of what the war against colonialism is about is a struggle for our own humanity as a people. It is a statement that we are making. We don't run around saying Black Lives Matter because Black Lives Matter. We say Black Lives Matter through our actions to take our lives back from white power. And that's not trying to find an accommodation with white power. That's not teaching them to unlearn their racism and to come up with better methods of oppressing us. That's overturning the whole foul social system, and then you take your chances with that. Because some people are frightened by the idea, some Africans are frightened by the idea of having to take power over our own lives. And that's one of the reasons Harriet Tubman had to carry a gun. Because when you get out there in the middle of nowhere, some people wanted to go back. And she knew what a problem that was. And she had a gun, put it out and said, dead men tell no tales. You will not go back and betray what it is that we're trying to do. So this issue is a really critically significant issue that's most often understated, and even now is being understated. And even how it was written in the document, I think you said it was number 8 that we spoke about just now. It's an understated contradiction. It's profound, it's deep, much deeper than most of us understand. It's not something that the so-called, what do they call themselves, menticide people, necessarily have a grip on as well. It's a part of a revolutionary struggle. There's no way to get to some kind of cure of it. And we start off recognizing, yes, Africans have to suffer a severe mental distress under colonialism, but there is no way, there's no cure under colonialism either. The cure is in the process of destroying colonialism and achieving that. And how many people how many people we know here on in this call, in our communities and what have you, suffer such severe mental distress, and it represents itself in 1,000 different ways, like slaves in a cage, which is what we are. And we don't have the ability to have a life beyond the constraints of the cage that we've been thrust into. Yeah, it's enough to drive you crazy. And the way you reattain your sanity is breaking out, is destroying it. And in the process of doing that, trying to destroy those who put us in the cage and cage making altogether. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you so much, Chairman, for that answer. And thank you to Comrade Nasir in Kuwait for posing the question.
I hope, Nasir, I hope you got this. Well, you did, because you quoted from the study materials. Uhuru, yes.
Uhuru. So we have probably about time for one more question, Chairman. And this next question came from Comrade Chimurenga Salambao. He's the National Director of Organization for the party in the US. And Chimurenga asks, Chairman, do you see post-revolution relationship between the Caribbean and our national homeland?
I see a post-revolutionary relationship between Africans generally. I mean, the Caribbean will become what it normally should function as more or less an outpost of Africa, and we're talking about what will ultimately become world economy, a different world economy. And then part of that process of making that world economy occur will be the liberation of African people globally as a part of a single process, because this is what must be understood by most people. Colonial capitalism is not just a US or French-based thing. It's a global social system, and it impacts us everywhere. And so even if the French are not the ones who are predominantly oppressing us in New Jersey, the fact is those oppressors in New Jersey cooperate with the French in terms of the total maintenance of a social system that requires the colonial slavery of Africans and other peoples around the world. So yeah, that's going to happen. And I think that we need to be able to not even think about the possibility of some kind of world, post-colonial world that would have these separate entities out there on our own. There has to be a world economy. There's no way, for example, that much of what we call the Caribbean can even exist without being a part of a greater economy. What is it based on, most of it? Tourism, fishing, and stuff like that. It has to become a part of a global economy, so that the production that we do in Brazil, the industry that we create in what we call South Africa, also functions to serve our interests in what we call the Caribbean and the rest of the world. It's going to have to be that kind of a seamless economy that only African
revolution can bring to the surface. So that's what we're looking at. And I want to say, Comrade Chimurenga, that's part of what it is, that this process we're involved in now, going toward our second plenary, Seventh Congress Plenary. The process that we've just been talking about, that we unleashing at this moment, which is complicated, difficult, because it's a short period of time that we have to accomplish a lot of stuff. But this is what we are trying to do. Then we talk about the Caribbean being a part of it. It is a part. It's one seamless thing, and the African Socialist International and cadre construct a part of the construction of what it is that we are. And we have a very short period of time to pull this thing together. It's hard work that's associated with it. I know some people saying, well, we don't have much time, we're doing so much, and that is true. This is impossible. What I've asked us to do in this short period of time is impossible, but that's what we've been asked to do. So the question is not to say, wow, this is impossible. The question is, say, how the hell do we do this despite the fact that it's supposed to be impossible? That's where we are, Comrade Chimurenga Slambayo, Director of Organization, Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to Comrade Chimurenga for that question. So we have about 4 minutes before we go into announcements, Chairman. So do you want to make any closing statements?
Well, I just hope that part of what I wanted to send a shout out to Cast Iron. And these are the comrades who have been working like with Panther Cubs. I think it's how they characterize themselves, and they have been producing certain memorabilia that they are selling in order to make contributions to political prisoners, and more specifically to Black Panther Party political prisoners. So I want to send a shout out to them, and I'm hoping that somebody can put something in the comment section about how people can secure some of what it is that they're selling. This is a watch that I'm wearing with a picture of Fred Hampton on it. And they have Malcolm X and other kinds of things, and they have pins and buttons. So getting this contributes to that. And so I want people to do that. And also I'm hoping that the announcement is on here about the Louisiana United International that has, I think, a 24-hour webinar that's happening. And people, if it's not, then put it in the comment section so that people who are here can find it and go to it. It's important work that's happening in Louisiana, USA. So I just wanted to make those kind of observations. And with that, Comrade Director, hoping I haven't taken too much of the time to prohibit your successfully putting forth the other announcements.
Uhuru, Chairman, not at all. Thank you so much. Again, really appreciate your leadership and this incredible study. And want people to know that the document that we're reading from the political report to the first Seventh Congress Plenary is in the comment section on Facebook and on YouTube. So you guys can, look at that and, continue to read it and study it and, use those same materials for the next week's study. But because of time, I want everyone to know that if your question was not answered, one of our moderators will correspond with you and we'll make sure that the chairman does see your question. This study was brought to you by the Department of Agitation and Propaganda, Winning the War of Ideas. For your revolutionary news and analysis, you can visit theburningspear.com. For Revolutionary Radio, dynamic shows and music by Africans all around the world, tune into Black Power 96.3 FM, broadcasting out of St. Petersburg, Florida, and accessible via the Black Power 96 app for Apple and Android, or online at blackpower96.org. The theory of African internationalism is a theory of practice. All the energy of the African People's Socialist Party is focused on the destruction of colonial capitalism. Africans of the world, go to our website, apspuhuru.org, to fill out our contact form. Order your copy of Chairman Amalia Shitela's latest book, Vanguard, The Advanced Attachment of the African Revolution, at burningspearmarketplace.com. The African People's Socialist Party is inviting you to our second Seventh Congress Plenary, happening February 6th through the 9th, 2021, themed African Workers of the World Unite and Organize. You can register today at apspplenary.org and read the call written by Chairman Amalia Shitela. On Wednesday, December 16th at 7 p.m. Eastern, join a study hosted by the African People's Solidarity Committee and featuring Chairman Amalia Shitela titled 2021 African Revolution and Reparations. APSC Chairwoman Penny Hess speaks with the chairman to sum up 2020 and look ahead to 2021 as the African People's Socialist Party continues to lead and build the worldwide African Revolution and the role of white people continuing to build the movement for reparations from the white community. Register for the study at tinyurl.com/reparations2021. People can purchase Black Panther, Malcolm X, Che, and other Che Guevara and other pins, watches, etc., in support of political prisoners. Black Panther Commemoration Committee, New Jersey, New York. The link. What the chairman was just modeling some of that just now. The link is www.naabpp.org or King. It's KINGY. Yes, KINGYATTAPAL.com. And half of all purchases go to political prisoners. So we'll make sure that link is dropped in the Facebook and YouTube comment section so you guys can visit there and get some of that merchandise and support political prisoners. Every Tuesday from 9 to 10 p.m. Eastern, join Ralph Pointer on What's Happening Blog Talk Radio. Ralph Pointer is a member of the Black is Back Coalition and chairs the Political Prisoner Working Group. He is a longtime freedom fighter and leads the Lynn Stewart Committee. To tune in via phone, you can call 347-857-3293, or you can listen on your computer at Blog Talk Radio. We are calling on people to follow the All African Peoples Development and Empowerment Project on Facebook or visit developmentforafrica.org for important information and helpful tips in regards to the colonial virus COVID-19. APDEP has launched an international telehealth program, a free resource for African people to get our COVID-19 related questions and concerns answered by licensed doctors and nurses through Project Black Ankh. You can make your free virtual appointment with one of their professional healthcare providers by going to developmentforafrica.org/telehealth. Looking for more opportunities of live political education from Chairman Amalia Shitela? Tune in every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern on the Chairman Amalia Shitela Facebook like page and Burningspur TV YouTube page with the Chairman's address to the African nation, discussing important topical issues and providing us with an African internationalist analysis. Lastly, to keep up with our movement events, visit theburningspear.com's events page and subscribe to our mailing list. Thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Amalia Taught Me